Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the webinar. I see a lot of people joining already, so let me introduce myself. My name is Tjerk Wardenaar. I'm your moderator today for the webinar, the CCRI CSO webinar on navigating the funding landscape. As said, thank you for logging in on time. We're expecting quite a crowd today, but we also have a very full agenda, so I aim to really start already with the program for today that will last until 3 o'clock. In the webinar, we will focus on a very important topic when we talk about the transition towards a circular economy, and that is funding. I think that in the last years, we see a growing circular awareness and that there are increasingly public and private financiers that are introducing new dedicated funding programs or put a specific additional focus on circular economy on their existing instruments. So this is, of course, very good news. But that being said, I think for a lot of project promoters, it is still not always easy to find proper funding or to actually navigate through the funding landscape. So what we try to do today is introducing how does that funding landscape look like, what kind of funding might be applicable to your project, and then after that brief introduction, we will have 4 interesting speakers, very relevant speakers. We will have Matitas from the European Commission, DG Regio, who will introduce support for circular economy projects under the EU cohesion policy, followed by Jean-Claude Merchot, who will talk about the LIFE program. Then we have Nathalie Binet from the European Investment Bank. She will talk about how the EIB can support the funding of circular economy projects. And then we will end with Gianmarco Salcioni from Intesa São Paulo, who will focus on the topic, but from a private finance instrument perspective. Then we will end with a Q&A. Before we go to the content of this meeting, next slide, indeed, thank you. I have to explain briefly the rules of the meeting for today. You're all asked to have your cameras and microphones turned off during the meeting. Also to stay muted throughout the meeting, but that does not mean that we don't want your input. We ask you to share your questions via the chat. We will gather these questions and we will ask them to the speakers at the end during the Q&A. In case that you have any technical problems, you can send a message in the chat or by email to the CCRI CSO email address. The meeting will be recorded, as you see. That means if you wish to stay anonymous, just refrain from posting any questions in the chat. And in that case, well, your participation will not be recorded. With those introductory rules, I want to go to the content of the webinar of today, which is the funding landscape. And we will start with very briefly introducing how the funding landscape look like. Next slide, please. And you can look at the funding landscape from a lot of different perspectives. And it is, of course, a very diverse landscape. But the first initial categorization that you can make is actually looking at who are the funders, who are the financiers that actually provide funds for circular economy. And in there is one broad distinction to be made. You have on the one hand, public funders who provide funds with a more social, broader societal perspective. It's governments, multilateral development banks like the World Bank. You have promotional banks at the national level, but also at EU level, like the EIB. And then in some cases, you also have pension funds that really have a public perspective. In addition to this, public funders, you'll have private funders or financiers who are operating from their perspective. And the first one that comes in mind is, of course, banks. We all know commercial banks. Then there are institutional investors, can be, for example, private pension funds. Then you have organizations like venture capital or business angels. You also have lease financiers, and then there's one large category that we can categorize as crowdfunding. And these different funders have several instruments to their disposal. Next slide, please. And I think that there is really a multitude of funding instruments, but very broadly, we can categorize them in 5 different types of funding. They're here on the slide. So the first one, I think everybody knows, it's debt, which is a contractual agreement between a borrower and a lender. You have equity, where you actually get funding for a share of a company. Then there's grants and subsidies that are offered by governments at several governing levels. Guarantees, here there is a third party that actually takes over the debt in case that the borrower defaults. And then finally, there's a very broad category that's alternative funding that we won't focus on that much today, but in this category, you can think of instruments like crowdfunding, lease funding, or newer instruments like social impact bonds. Well, with this first introduction on the funding instruments and how are they then applicable to your project? Next slide, please. The way to actually approach this funding landscape and these instruments is to look at the maturity level of your project. And what you see on the slide here on the graph is a typical risk return profile of a project over time. So when a project, a company, a technology is in a very early stage, really research and development phase, you will see that the risk level, that's the upper line, is very high, while the return, so the cash inflow, is still very low. And this, while the project is developing, is of course changing. This graph tells you, of course, something about your cash flows. You can easily see that initially you have a very negative cash flow. You have do the investments first that come later, but it also tells you something about what is the value of your project for example, an investor. Because the value in the beginning, when you're really early on, is only in the ideas yet. There's a very promising idea that may be materialized in the future and provide future growth, but there are no assets yet, and there is not a positive cash flow yet. Then when you go towards pilot and early deployment, you see that you get still a lot of value from the idea, but there are also some initial assets growing. And that develops then when there is actually a wide-scale commercial deployment of your project. You see that the value is in the assets of your project, as well as stable revenues coming in. Dus with this idea, where is the value in my project currently? You can also look at the different instruments. Next slide, please. Where you will see when your project is very early on, you see that instruments like grants and subsidies, and maybe later on guarantees, are the instruments that in most cases are most appropriate for your project. Well, when you are already further, for example, when you go to commercial deployment, it's not anymore grants and subsidies to focus on, but it's more applicable to look at different debt elements. So by understanding a little bit, where are you in your technology development, or where are you in the development of your project, you can position yourself on this graph, get a little bit of a feeling, where is the value in my project, and look at these different elements, instruments that might be better applicable for your project. Next slide, please. This is also the way how we within the CCRI CSO have categorized more concrete funding opportunities. So when after this presentation you're interested in concrete funding opportunities, you can go to the website, to the CCRI CSO website, and look into support materials. There is a specific part on funding opportunities with financing types, and there the types of funding instruments come back, helping you to identify possible funding opportunities for your project. Next slide, please. So with this very brief and short introduction, I want to go to the first speaker of today. The first speaker is Mate Tas. Mate Tas is an economist by education, working already for the Commission since 2004, dealing with cohesion funds for over 10 years. He is currently in charge of doing the policy coordination in DG Regio to ensure consistent use of the cohesion policy funds across member states in the fields of energy, climate, and the environment. And Mate will introduce us into the support for circular economy projects under the EU Cohesion Fund. Mate, thanks for being here and good luck.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to be here and thanks for inviting me to represent DG Regio at this workshop. And very briefly, I'm going to guide you through the rationale of cohesion policy and this EU funding policy providing support for circular economy in the EU member states and regions. So we can already start with the presentation. Going to the next slide. I cannot start my presentation without mentioning the global picture, which is the European Green Deal, which is the, let's say, the growth strategy of the present Commission running from 2019 to 24. And this guides very much also the multi-annual financial framework, which covers the period 2021-27, from which cohesion policy represents an important share. Now, the European Green Deal is a set of high-level ambitions, both in terms of legislative proposals, but also policy ambitions. And it's not going to be new to you, but of course, circularity features very high on the agenda of the Green Deal. And we have various initiatives also in terms of funding, which supports and which helps to contribute and to meet this objective to turn the EU into a circular economy by 2050. Next slide, please. As I said, cohesion policy represents a very, very important share of the EU budget. And we have to work towards making sure that this policy contributes very much to meet the objectives of the Green Deal. Obviously, when a public authority has an ambition, we always want to see money put next to it. And cohesion policy is an obvious choice to divert towards these objectives. So in this current period, which is running from 2021 until 2027, the cohesion policy funds will support the structural transformation of the regions and accompany them in the transition to climate neutral and circular economy. Of course, we have to recognize that the starting point differs across member states substantially, and we believe that cohesion policy is very well placed to address these different starting points and development needs. This is a bottom-up policy, very much based on the needs of the regions and member states. And it supports the actions which are defined actually by the regions and member states themselves, with the Commission playing a very strong coordination role to channel the funds in the same direction and to ensure a consistency in the use of the funds. In the next slide, we will see a very broad overview of the funding as such. Just to clarify the basics, cohesion policy consists of 4 funding instruments. And the overall budget from the EU budget to cohesion policy is 390 billion euros. Depending on the co-financing rate which ranges between 40 and 85% in the regions, depending on their development level. So together with the national co-financing, the total investment volume throughout these 7 years is almost 550 billion euros. So this is quite a substantial amount. Of course, the breakdown by member states varies significantly, primarily based on the size and population of the countries, obviously. No surprise that Poland will have the highest allocation. The colors represent the different funds, just to make sure you read the graph correctly. But what matters here is indeed the total allocation from the EU budget to these member states. Very important to underline that every member state and region benefits from cohesion policy funding. So there is no region which would be left out from the scope of eligibility. But of course, different rules apply to the less developed regions than to the more developed regions in terms of where the money should be concentrated. As we are a public public funding policy, we have to operate under objectives. We have 5 policy objectives for cohesion policy for the 21-27 period. This is, I would say, more for the Commission or more for the budget authorities to understand where the money is going. It's not mainly for the beneficiaries. But just to highlight that we have quite high level of objectives formulated in the regulation. And the second policy objective is a greener Europe, which covers also all the actions and measures into contributing to circular economy. The big benefit of cohesion policy funds and cohesion policy as such is that it's based on programming by the member states. It provides an integrated framework for national, regional, and also urban development. So it's a cross-sector or multi-thematic policy. And due to the fact that it secures funding for 7 years, it provides financial security and it makes sure that we can really plan with these funds in the long term. So we believe this is a very strong asset of this policy, especially in the turbulent times that we are living in. Obviously, as I said, this is a multi-thematic policy investing in various sectors. But what drives the investment and what drives this big budgetary support from the EU budget is the cohesion objective, which is defined in the EU treaties. And this is the contribution to the territorial, economic, and social cohesion of the EU member states and regions, and to reduce the disparities between these regions. So obviously, how we achieve this objective, we achieve it through sectoral investments, and the policy mix will depend, as I said, very much on the specific development needs of the regions and member states. So how does it function in practice? It's described in the next slide, which is a little bit dense, I would say, but it will help us to understand the context a bit better. We operate under shared management under the EU budget. And I'm going to explain what does it mean. It's a shared responsibility between the European Commission and the member states, with very strong competencies and responsibilities and ownership of the member states as such. We operate under programs agreed by the Commission and the member states for 7 years. And these programs are practically the documents which define the scope of the support. And these are the programs and these are the strategy documents which I said have to set out the development needs of the regions and member states, and also the actions, how they are going to address these very different development needs. So the programs are going to be very different, and they are actually very different across the member states and the regions. Beyond defining the real scope and the actions, what they are going to finance, they also set out whether it's going to be support in forms of grant, so non-repayable assistance, or repayable assistance in form of financial instruments. It can be loans or guarantees, equities, depending on the individual actions, what the program has set out. For the current financial period of 21-27, we have 379 programs across the EU, which is quite a lot. We have a mix of national programs and quite many regional programs, depending very much on the administrative structure of the different member states. And these programs are not the programs of the Commission. They were drafted by the member states and regions, and they were adopted by the Commission. So if you want to consult them, there is a link on this slide which leads you to the titles of these programs. But you have to look for the program as such in the website of the authorities who drafted them, because they are made public in each member state, and they will help you to understand what will be the scope of support in the 21-27 period. When it comes to implementation, there the member states play a very strong role, because actually they implement funds. In practice, it means that they design and publish the calls for project proposals. They do select the projects as such. They enter into grant contracts with the beneficiaries, and then they are monitoring the implementation of the projects on the ground and make sure that everything went as planned in the grant contract. And then they also pay to the beneficiaries. And once these payments are checked through audits, then the Commission is reimbursing those expenditure to the member states' budget. So it's an ex post reimbursement from the EU budget. What does it mean? To be crystal clear, we from the Commission, we do not manage projects and we do not see projects. What we do, we monitor the program implementation, and we make sure that the projects selected by the member states and implemented by the beneficiaries are on track of meeting the objectives of the programs which are agreed between the member states and the Commission. Of course, the monitoring we do it through various ways. Of course, we do see the calls. We do have comments sometimes on the calls for proposals. And we do intervene and we make suggestions for selection criteria to make sure that, for example, the projects to be selected are in line with the sustainability principle. They do not harm the environment and other principles, but in the end, we are very much in the hands of the member states. If we go to the next slide, please, here what we see is the investment areas that we as Commission, we were pushing during the program negotiations with the member states. As I said, the programs were adopted. And what are the actions that we see in the programs are quite various when it comes to circular economy. Of course, there is a heavy focus still on infrastructure investment for the treatment of municipal waste. We have to recognize that in many member states, the infrastructure endowment is still fairly weak, especially in view of the EU targets when it comes to recycling and landfilling targets. So the EU budget still has to support those investments. But beyond that, we very much try to focus the funds on let's say, more sustainable investments. Let it be technological development for circularity, circular production processes, and also influencing the consumers and pushing them towards a more sustainable consumption patterns. There is funding for improving the knowledge base in the economy and to push the companies to promote circular economy in their own processes. Very important, we also support capacity building for all stakeholders, and it can also include advice and advisory services to the project beneficiaries or potential beneficiaries. What is excluded by EU law from the funding is landfilling and treatment of mixed municipal waste, because these are against the waste objectives of the EU environmental legislation. Going to the next slide, we will see the funding by member state allocated to circular economy investments. Here again, the picture varies a lot, and the reason for that is that the investment needs are very different in the different member states, and the investment choices are very different in the regions and member states. The total planned budget, together with the national co-financing, amounts to almost 9 billion euros. So this is quite an important budget, as I said. Now we have to see how it's used and whether it's used according to the plans, and what we are going to monitor. What does it bring in terms of outputs and results? Going to the next slide, we will see the breakdown by type of actions. So what are the measures which were planned and their budgetary consequences or budgetary allocations in the programs? As I already said, there is quite an important focus. Half of the budget goes to household waste management, but these are very important because they will contribute to better recycling rates, which in the end will produce raw materials which can be reused by the enterprises. Very important area of intervention or measure is the environmental friendly production processes in enterprises. These can be technological developments or also infrastructure investments for the SMEs, primarily to promote circularity in their processes. I think we can go to the next slide, where I want to highlight that beyond the sectorial investments, there is a strong focus on the urban dimension under cohesion policy. There is a dedicated budget, 8% of one of the funds, the European Regional Development Fund, which has to be programmed and planned in a way that the urban authorities and the territorial authorities are very much involved in designing the strategy, but also selecting the projects. This 8% of the budget from the ERDF, from this fund, has to be planned in line with territorial or local strategies. So those authorities in charge of this budget will have to draw up their local strategies, which allows again for a very good integrated approach at local level to address the local needs better. And then when it comes to implementation, as I said, these authorities will be involved in project selection. This is a way to strengthen the place-based approach under cohesion policy, but also to give financial resources to those authorities so that they can be involved in a decentralized manner in the implementation of cohesion policy funds. This budget dedicated to urban authorities increasing over time. So we had less in the 2014-2020 period. It's a big improvement that it has increased to 8%, and we will see how it develops further. So be prepared if you're a local urban authority that you will be charged to plan and spend the money in the future. We're concluding, I think, with the last slide, which is a project example. We have, of course, many projects, as you can imagine, from 500 billion euros. But this is a project from the 14-20 period from Finland, which was a technological development project. And it introduced a method to turn old cotton textiles into sustainable, high-quality fiber. Of course, which is a lot better for the environment. It's the chemical pollution is a lot less. The waste generated is a lot less. So I think this is a very good example to demonstrate that such a project can contribute to the specialization into clean technology of a region, and how the European funds can contribute to the transition process. With this, I finish my presentation, and of course, I will be very happy to address any question what you may have.
Thanks, Matej, for this presentation. Thank you for introducing us into the Cohesion Fund and the opportunities for circular economy projects. I already see questions in the chat. That is very good. We will collect them and we will raise them during the Q&A at the end of the presentations. We go to our next speaker, that is Jean-Claude Merchol, who is an advisor for the LIFE program to the Directorate for General Affairs, Knowledge and Resources within the Directorate General for the Environment. Jean-Claude was before the head of unit for the LIFE program when the Commission developed the present LIFE regulation. And Jean-Claude will introduce us, not surprisingly, into the LIFE program today and how that relates to circular economy.
Yes, thanks a lot, Dirk, and good afternoon to all of you. I'm very happy to be here with you and to have the opportunity to present the LIFE program. Yes, we can start directly with the next slides, please. Yes, the LIFE program, I hope, I'd say many of you know already, but in fact, the LIFE program is well known because it's a program that has been created in 1992, and it was created at the same time of the Bird and Habitat Directive. So LIFE, from the beginning, it contributed to the establishment of Natura 2000 network, and it continues now to support it. But from the beginning, it continue now to support it, but now, as you can see here, it covers many I would say different areas. And why? Because in fact, first of all, to insist on the fact that LIFE, of course, all the programs, they are, I would say, involved in I would say environment and climate, but LIFE is the only program purely dedicated to environment, nature conservation, and climate action. So it aims to contribute to the shift towards sustainable, circular, energy efficient, and renewable energy-based economy, as well as a climate neutral and resilient economy, and as you understand from my first word, to improve quality of environment. And during, say, the 30 years from its creation, we have supported around, say, 6,000 projects, which are projects with public or private actors and society, civil society organization. And the specific success, I would say, of the LIFE program is, first of all, attributed to its bottom-up approach. That's why you see all this type of areas that we cover. But at the same time, it is due to, I would say, the beneficiaries who have implemented the project, because the project, they are, as we have a bottom-up approach, the project are conceived and implemented on the ground by the people who have decided to come with their own proposal and their own initiatives, and they are the ones who make the success of the program. A few words on the organization of the program. So maybe just because Mate mentioned that for Cohesion Fund, so you have shared management. So just to indicate that for a LIFE program, it's what we call direct management. So it means that the Commission is preparing, I would say, the program. We have a multi-level program. The Commission is launching the call and it's monitoring the project. When I say the Commission, in fact, we have in Commission services, we have now 3 Directorate General involved in the LIFE program. So we have Directorate General for Environment and Climate, and since 2021, we have Directorate General for Energy. And regarding the management, it has been delegated to an executive agency, which is CINEA, so the European Climate Infrastructure and Environment Executive Agency. If we look now quickly at the budget, compared to the previous budget, to understand, I would say, the focus of the program, we have had an increase of 1 billion, especially for nature and biodiversity. And we have had an increase of 1 billion because one of the sub-program, which is clean energy transition, has been, I would say, joining LIFE because it was previously supported under Horizon 2000 at the time. And as you can see, so the budget is substantial, but compared to the EU budget, still rather limited. Next slide, please. Yes, so to give you slightly more, I would say, in depth on the program. First of all, we have general objectives designed by the regulation. So as I mentioned, so the shift to the contribution due to the size of the program, but the contribution to circular, energy efficient, renewable energy. We have as well protection of environment, and it includes waste, water, air, and soil, and the health of biodiversity loss, and to tackle biodiversity degradation, and it includes, of course, support to Natura 2000. And they are complemented by, I would say, specific objectives which explain more the type of activity we support, because we can support, I would say, the development, demonstration, and promotion of innovative techniques, methods, or approaches. We can support development, implementation, and monitoring and enforcement of relevant legislation and policies. So as you see, technical aspect and policy aspect. And as a third element to be indicated as well is the fact that we have to act as a catalyst for large-scale development. Here, maybe yes, because Jack mentioned at the beginning, presented a slide on the technology readiness. In fact, just to make clear, if you look at projects, you have, say, the research development first, and this is more for colleagues of DG Research to simplify. Then you have demonstration, testing of technologies, and it's here that life can intervene. And then you will have, say, large-scale development, but this will be more for financial instruments. So just to give very simply, I would say, an idea of what life does. And regarding the sub-programs, so as you can see, we have 4 sub-programs, so nature and biodiversity, so I mentioned it not to insist too much again. Then we have circular economy and quality of life. It's a new, well, the activities were covered in the past, but now we have really insisted on in the title to add circular economy to really make clear, I would say, what the objective is. And this program, of course, contributes to the Circular Economy Action Plan. So it targets projects that reduce waste, for instance, and increase efficiency in the use of resources. As well, it can finance initiatives to improve quality of air and soil, and the ecological status of waters. It contributes as well to the implementation of the Zero Pollution Action Plan, and it intervenes as well to reduce dangerous chemicals. So again, a broad spectrum. We have then a third sub-program, and you see here on the presentation, so you see the different budget allocated to them. So you see that for circular economy, it's 1 billion and 300 million, more or less. And then we have a third program, which is climate mitigation adaptation. So the activities is to contribute to the EU ambition to reduce greenhouse emission by at least 50% by 2030. It also targets reduction of our vulnerability to climate change, and it contributes to the implementation of the EU adaptation strategy. And the last sub-program we have, so the new sub-program we have with us, is clean energy transition, and it's really interesting that it joined live because it's really complementary to the other activities. And this sub-program so aim to accelerate the transition toward an economy based on sustainable energy. So it finances projects in order to break market barriers that hamper socioeconomic transition to energy efficiency on the one hand, and the use of renewable energy sources. And of course, all these sub-program and life program as such, all say 100% of the activities contribute to the implementation of the Green Deal. Next slide, please. Yes, thanks. Here, not to enter again in too many details, but just to show that if we just consider circular economy project, you see here, I would say, all the variety of sectors which are covered, because you see it can be textile, batteries, construction, metal industry, mining, packaging. So this is again due to the specificity of the live program, which is really a bottom-up approach. So what is important is that the persons that come with their, I'd say, own ideas, but of course in line with the objective of the program. And for that, in fact, even if we are very flexible, we publish what we call priority topics, which in fact are topics that give an idea of the project where we expect the area where we expect a proposal. Next slide, please. Yes, here, just to give you as well an idea of the type of beneficiaries that we have. So you see, if we take it as a whole globally, so we have globally four groups, so private companies, university and research centers, public organization, and NGO and non-governmental organization. And here we have made a specific breakdown for you for region and provinces on the one hand, municipalities and other public administration and agencies, so that you can see that in fact we have really a big spectrum of beneficiaries. So Life is really supporting all type of beneficiaries. Next slide, please. Yes, and now if we come to the type of project which are supported, so I've indicated the type of project and the size of co-financing. So first of all, we have what we call a standard action project. In fact, they are the bulk of the project. So it's, I'd say, the projects that are here from the beginning of the program, and which in fact they are here to, I'd say, cover all the type of activities. The co-financing is 60 to 75%. In fact, it's 60% in general, and can be higher in case of projects they support, so either partly or fully, the habitat and species. Then we have, and this project, yes, our project usually for a maximum of 10 years, but normally they are projects for, I would say, around 4 years. Then we have strategic integrated project and the strategic network project. In fact, these are type of projects which have been, I would say, created in 2014 in order to have activities which really cover, I would say, broader spectrum. So not only the very small project, but at regional level normally. So for integrated project, we expect projects that implement at regional or even multi-regional level, I'd say, all this climate and environmental strategy. So this strategy, of course, should be required either by the union. So it's not any strategy, but to give an idea, so this strategy can be circular economy strategy, air quality plans, climate mitigation, adaptation strategies. Yeah.
You have 3 more minutes, but also a lot of slides, so maybe
No, but it's thank you, but it's not an issue. It's just that I just want to have different slides for you to keep afterwards. Okay. So we can go to the next slide if you want. Who can apply? So here it's very short, but it's for you to keep it in mind. So all the entity can apply, except of course natural persons, and we are very flexible because it's you can present in a consortium or alone, and the only difference is that for clean energy transition we have I would say sometimes for different calls they ask for 3 participants for 3 member states, but it's mentioned at the level of the calls. You can take the next slide, please. So you see here again, it's rather quick. It's just to mention what I mentioned already, but it's type of activity that we have. And for that, as I said, we have, I would say, these different I would say topics which are mentioned, and you get, I would say, a better appreciation if you take them. But if you have very good ideas and they don't cover this area, we will take them into account. Next slide. And then here, but I mentioned it more or less, so we do not, say, consider research, of course, because research is for others. And I just put here, say, for you, for technical reasons, type of activities which are not covered, but they are obvious activities, for instance, activities which are not covering, say, the period of the project. So next one, please. And then it's just for you to keep the type of, I'd say, eligibility costs that we have. So of course, personnel costs and so on, we cover. Volunteers, we even had in the past, some years ago, a specific call for project with volunteers. But here's just for you to have it. And then next slide. And here again, just for you to understand, especially for the indirect cost, so it's 7%, because sometimes we are asked what it is. And again, here you have the list of type of activities that can be eligible, especially for communication and so on. And next one. And here, just to we can close here if you want, and it's just to remind you that you can go on the website. You will see all the different dates, and you can get additional dates. And there are slides which are not presented, but they are just attached in order for you to get more information. So maybe I will stop here. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Jean-Claude. Thanks a lot for this extensive introduction of the live program. We will share the slides, also the additional slides that Jean-Claude provided after the webinar. As said, please share your questions in the chat. We will discuss them later on in the Q&A. And we will go to the next speaker of today, Nathalie Binet. Nathalie is a senior climate advisor in the EIB Lending Operations Directorate. In the 12 years that she has been with the EIB, she has notably headed the EIB Prague office and covered lending operations in Central and Eastern European region, as well as in the Eastern neighborhood. And before joining the bank, Nathalie has worked as a trader in various institutions such as RBS, Crédit Agricole, Standard Chartered. Nathalie, welcome. And Nathalie will introduce us in how the EIB is supporting the circular economy transition in Europe.
Thanks a lot, Dirk. Good afternoon to all. I will, next slide, please. I will briefly introduce the bank, the EIB. So we are the Bank of the European Union. We are a public bank. We are owned and governed by the 27 EU member states. We are AAA rated, which enables us to have very favorable funding costs that we are able then to pass on to our customers. We are also the world's largest multilateral institution and a leader in green finance. And we are proud to name ourselves the Climate Bank. The EIB group is actually constituted of two entities, the European Investment Bank, that is mainly a provider of debt financing for large amounts, and the European Investment Fund, that is a specialist provider of risk finance to SMEs, and that is mainly active in intermediated financing through guarantees and also through equities by investing in equity funds. And next slide, please. So we are supporting the priorities of the European Union, and in particular, we are focusing on four priorities: innovation, digital and human capital, sustainable energy and natural resources, sustainable cities and region, SMEs and mid-caps. And as you can see, actually, circular economy is kind of overlapping with all these priorities, which makes it, I would say, a sweet spot for EIB financing. Next slide, please. We, as I was highlighting, we are focusing on climate, and we have very ambitious climate target. We have stopped for financing unabated fossil fuel since 2021. We have a commitment that at least 50% of our financing should be dedicated to green project by 2025, and of which 15% for adaptation. 100% of our financing has to be Paris aligned, which means compatible with the 1.5 degree scenario. So we are checking that all projects and also counterparts are aligned. And we are also aiming to mobilize 1 trillion financing in green projects in the decade 2021-2030. We have also very strict climate and environmental safeguards and criteria. As I was highlighting before, we are assessing the counterpart at counterparty level, the Paris alignment. And we are also aligning our green definitions with the substantial contribution criteria of the EU taxonomy. Next slide, please. So to move to the circular economy topic, when considering the financing of circular economy project and circular economy entities, you have to take into account that it's a very diversified landscape and that very diverse type of financing are needed depending on the type of business model. It depends a lot whether you have a traditional closing loop model, for instance, which can be heavy on infrastructure, CAPEX, on new types of business model, such as product as service, leasing sharing models, and so on. Another very important point is the maturity and the size of the company and of the project. Because depending on this stage, as has been previously also introduced, you might need different types of financing from equity to debt. It also, I mean, there is another important point that is the risk profile of the sector within the circular economy activity, which carries its own type of risk, which can be technical, market, value chain for recycling, for instance, recycling projects, regulatory, client risk, etc. Next slide, please. So if we first focus on the different business models, as I was highlighting before, you have more traditional circular economy projects, which are can be like waste recycling types of project, also new products that are designed in order to bring new product to the market that are made with recycled components or are easier to recycle and so on. For instance, in terms of plastics and so on. That may involve new ways, material streams, new technology. So there are some uncertainty there on the technology or on the feedstock. So it involves then some specific types of assessment of the counterparty. And there might be a need to mitigate some residual risk, depending also on the maturity of the counterparty. And here, the product that the bank is proposing that I would say are the most suited, we see it as investment loan, framework loans, venture debt, and intermediated lending product. I will revert to that a bit later when I will introduce the different types of product that we propose. When it comes to the new circular business models, which are more focused on sharing, leasing models, then it's a bit different. You have a strong focus on cash flow, earning, contracts, less on infrastructure. It's less CAPEX heavy, I would say. The contracts and the client credit worthiness is very important. You have some new dimensions as well to be assessed in terms of residual value and some challenges in terms of evaluation of the assets. And so there is more focused on financing OPEX, working capital financing or supply chain financing, asset finance, and increased need for pre-commerce and startup financing. Here, the most appropriate product for the EIB are more like the intermediated lending and equity fund product, because that in general, our direct financing, I would say, is more geared toward CAPEX financing, and we will see that a bit later. Next slide, please. I won't be long on this one. I just wanted to show where we are able, at the EIB level and the EIF level, where we are able to provide financing. So basically, the extremely early stage of a company, this is not where we can focus our action. But with the equity funds that are financed by the EIF, we can already work on the startup and scale-up level. And at the EIB, with our venture debt product, and then our guarantees and our direct lending, we are also able then to cater for growth and mature companies. Next slide, please. So now I will introduce you to our product offering. We are providing direct financing for larger projects and larger companies. We have some products that are there to kind of for large volumes. I would say we have a minimum of 20 to 25 million of loan size, of ticket size, which should represent 50% of the investment cost, which means that we have to identify project of 40 to 50 million euros. It's a bit lower for our high impact venture debt product, where the minimum is at 15 million. We can propose framework loans. It's a senior loan that is financing multi-sector investment and that do not need to be identified upfront. So this can be, so there is then an appraisal at the time of the allocation of the facility. And this is quite useful for public sector projects. So for instance, for waste management project. Then we have investment loans. There it's more or less the same, except that all the components of the project have to be identified upfront. So we'll carry out an appraisal of the project and then we'll be able to finance it. Finally, we are also able to propose a project finance, which can be useful in the context where there is certainty on the future cash flows. Our high impact product is venture debt. It's a quasi-equity type of financing for earlier stage counterparties. And here we take more risk, but we also seek a higher return that is commensurate with the risk, and it can be cash interest or also warrant or profit participation. And this is more targeted at innovative, scalable startup or SMEs. Next slide, please. We are also proposing intermediated finance through lending guarantees and investment in equity. So lending, so we lend through commercial banks or national promotional banks. There can be our multi-beneficiary intermediated loan or intermediated framework loans that are based on future allocation. And the aim is that the final beneficiary can benefit from our reduced cost of funding. So there is then a financial benefit that is passed on to the final beneficiary. We have a guarantee product both at the EIB and at the EIF. The EIF, it's based on a call, and the EIB, it's on an ad hoc discussion, which can be based on future portfolio that are linked or existing portfolio that are delinked, and also that have various features, and you can know more if you want to know more. You can contact us, of course. And here it increases the risk bearing of the financial intermediary. So it can then propose loans to riskier beneficiaries or increase their lending capacity. We also propose securitization, and the EIF is proposing investment in equity funds. Next slide. I will not be able to finish. I think I've already explained that we can finance up to 50% of project costs, and that it's mainly CapEx, but also research staff costs and research staff costs. So anything that is in relation to RDI can also be financed. Maybe we go to the next slide because it's an interesting point. In the advisory, we are also proposing advisory services for private and public sector through the InvestEU Advisory Hub. And we also have public sector targeted advisory services through, for instance, Jaspers, that are linked to the use of EU funds and that can develop regional circular economy plans, or also through the Circular City Center that is proposing advisory to cities. I will stop there. The rest of the slide will be made available to you, and you feel free to reach out to us and to me if you need additional information. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathalie, for this introduction and also for highlighting at the end the different advisory services that are there that I think are very interesting also for the participants. So we will also share this information with the participants of today. This brings us to the fourth and last speaker of today, Gianmarco Salcioli, who has more than 30 years of experience in the financial markets. Gianmarco has been working in many different investment banks before he joined the IMI Corporate Investment Banking of Intesa Sao Paulo. In 2019, he has become the head of strategic marketing and ESG initiatives, where he is the coordinator of the team on ESG. And recently, he has been appointed the sustainability manager for the division. Gianmarco will introduce private instruments available for circular economic projects and investments.
Thank you very much, Tjerk. And by the way, I'm very happy to be here, very glad. I hope to perform at the same level of excellent interventions that were coming before me. Very briefly highlight my public speaking style is linear, rational, but sometimes I jump. So therefore, I'm pretty sure that I'm not going to finish all the slides because I just wanted to give you some highlights of how important is our circular economy funding historically, and how in Intesa San Paolo, of course, I'm in charge of corporate investment banking, which is the biggest part in terms of exposure and activity for the whole group, has been performing during the years. So if we move to the next slide, normally my slides are quite full. Apologies for that. I know that normally feedback coming from my presentation are similar to that. I apologize in advance, but just to tell you that sustainable finance instruments you see all there, I won't go through because I think you're all expert, almost experts, but there has been an ongoing debate on the fact that circular economy is, of course, is a use of proceeds destination, and that sustainable finance has already lost the adjective sustainable because it has become finance to cure. That's why we are aiming our circular economy effort that, by the way, was began many years ago because we were pioneering in 2015, where probably there was not existence of ESG world at all. We were exploring creating the Innovation Center with joining the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and by the way, in 2017 issuing the first bond for renewable energy and energy efficiency, and 2019 as a bank to finance the circular economy. Many other bonds have come after that and will come for sure. So circular economy, of course, is at the center of our commercial activity, and elaborating a little bit on the cities, we are perfectly aware that by 2050, 70% of world's population will live in cities. and they will be responsible for 70% of CO2 emissions. If we will have time, we will elaborate a little bit more on the target setting exercise that is obliging swiftly all banks adhering to the protocol to go to net zero financed emission by 2050, and of course with a very ambitious target 2030. So we are perfectly aware that smart cities, circular economy, to drive a global transition, urban systems are perfect in order to be financed, in order to lower the emissions, in order to create circular economies model in terms of recycling, reusing, repairing, refurbishing, remanufacturing, and to reduce waste. Another part, a very important part that is important to be highlighted, it's supply chain. Circular economy is going, and we are going to force and to drive maybe the working capital and liquidity management of our clients. I just, before going to the next slide, I just want to highlight another very important part, a little bit, I would say, I wouldn't say critical, but maybe a point of discussion. Circular economy needs to get out to the and take responsibility on what I'm saying, a kind of niche market. Circular economy has to grow in importance, in weight. And by the way, in our framework, in our business plan, we are probably the only bank, as far as I know, that has a dedicated vertical credit line dedicated to the circular economy projects in our 2022-2025 business plan of Intesa Sanpaolo Group, out of the 80 billion general for the transition finance as a whole. So this is extremely important to us. Going to the next slide. You see three pillars that we always discuss with clients, because another very important point we just want to highlight that the bank is growing, and what is Intesa Sanpaolo is trying to do, has done in the past and is willing to do in the future, to be a trusted advisor for our clients, to grow the awareness even of the clients toward the circular economy world, because from time to time we have the flavor that the clients are not yet ready to embrace this new way of producing, of consuming. And therefore, we have created in the past our circular economy lab that was founded in 2018. And the mission of the lab is to experiment and disseminate new models of value creation. So we do some seminars, webinars, we go on site, we calculate circularity assessment to the clients in order to drive them, because and to allow them to understand the change that has benefits that we see under the reputational area, under the economic benefits in terms of creation of value, redesigning of the process, and even in terms of financial benefits, lower cost and higher demand. Another part of financial benefits, lower cost and higher demand, we did even a partnership with a very important university, maybe you know, Bocconi University, where I graduated a lot of years ago, unfortunately, but this is where my activity and career started, that has created a paper that is very important, that has calculated the fact that there is a positive relationship between the de-risking effect and the degree of circularity, and the level of circularity of a company that increases the returns of the capital adjusted for the risks of its shares. Talking in, and going to the next slide, please, talking in very concretely, sorry, I skipped this, maybe going to the next one in order to save up some time. Thank you so much. Talking about the risking is extremely important to us, because we are going to finance a model that is virtuous and that is embedded in our evaluation. This is illustrative, but this is a slide of our ESG scoring that is fully embedded in our ESG credit framework, and therefore it provides with high upgrades or downgrades depending on the level of ESG that a client has and on the level of circularity that is embedded inside the model. So as you can see, and this is of course being asked by the regulator, we want to measure dynamically our activity, because both changing the models into more circular attitude, but even with the study of University Bocconi that just highlighted in a very few words, to make you understand and to highlight a very important point to us is the risking is a win-win process, because on one side we finance circular economy project. On the other side, we do feel the circular economy projects have a de-risking effect that is impacting on a positive way our portfolio analysis, and therefore we push for it. Talking about the next slide, is something that already been highlighted. Anyway, our ESG scoring has 140 quantitative KPI using 20 plus descriptions. Again, another very important point I just want to highlight, circularity. There has been a kind of debate going on even on this. Circularity is absolutely common to all the pillars, common to all sectors. Of course, more sectors are impacted compared to others, but we do not see a sector that is not potentially less or more circular than others. Of course, the ESG scoring evaluations, and please go to next slide, need to grow even in terms of measuring the circularity. This is a very important graph, maybe not so, let's say, intuitive at first sight, but I'm going to explain in 20 seconds. 0.4, 0.5 is the correlation observed among the ESG rating agencies. This means that we do have, in terms of measuring the circularity and ESG as a whole, we do have, again, data quality issue. Because the instrument to evaluate the circularity are different from providers, from banks, and for regulators do want, regulators and only the regulators do want a normal, let's say, a standard that is anyway is going to take place, I think, with even with the proposal started, at least the process with the proposal of the EU Commission, the last taxonomy update. Of course, this is completely different, the correlation between the ESG ratings to the normal financial ratings that are normally 0.8, 0.7. What does it mean? Does it mean that if you are AAA for S&P, you are AAA for Fitch on financial terms? If you are AAA for Sustainalytics on ESG on circularity, it cannot be true even for another provider. And this is another point that needs to be addressed. If we are going to move to skip maybe to page number 10, if I can ask you, in order to summarize it, to end up my intervention, another very important exercise, next one. Sorry, again, next one. I have too many. I know. It's my fault. It's my fault. Okay. You know, there is this exercise that 135 banks, more or less, are providing 85% of total lending. They are aligned with for 2013 in high emitting sectors. These sectors that you see on the slide, showed on the slide, are the high emitters where Intesa Sanpaolo has done disclosure for the baselining and the target on CO2 emissions. Of course, even here the standards are going to improve the exercise, but I want to state it very clearly that the exercise toward the decarbonization of the risk portfolio of the lending of the bank or in all different instruments, in this case is medium long-term lending, is going to be more and more performed with a correct measurement of the risk of circularity and his ESG as a whole, and with financing circular economy models that are going to decarbonize and to be put into our portfolio in order to reach our very ambitious targets. Jörg, back to you. Happy to take your questions in case.
Yeah, you have a minute to wrap up, eh? So.
Okay, 1 minute. So, again, happy to take your questions. Even in this case, on this different, there are other sectors to be added: aviation, agriculture, real estate, iron and steel. I'm quite positive on the fact that there will be a different way of measuring CO2, coming from the relative evaluation that you see in the metrics there to SBTi certification that is going to measure absolute value of CO2 emissions. Thank you.
Thanks, Gianmarco. Well, with this presentations, we go to the last part of this webinar. That's the Q&A. We have along the way picked up some very interesting questions already. First one is for Mate. Do the principles of the EU Sustainable Finance Taxonomy fit in with your assessment monitoring of the programs, for example, with the do no significant harm principle?
Yes, thanks for this question, which is an interesting one. The do no significant harm principle, which comes from the taxonomy regulation, indeed, it applies to the EU budget now in the 2021-27 period, but the legal requirements vary across the different instruments. And when it comes to cohesion policy as such, the legal basis is fairly weak, which is not a very good situation in terms of legislation, because it puts us as Commission in a fairly difficult situation. We see that for some other instruments, for example, mentioning the Recovery and Resilience Facility, which is providing huge budget support to member states, there is an eligibility criteria for all projects, all actions to be in line with the do no significant harm principle. Under cohesion policy, there is no such a strict requirement, but of course, we don't want that cohesion policy looks less green as other EU instruments. So even without a strong legal basis, we pursue a very high ambition from the Commission. And we did ask all member states, when they submitted their programs to the Commission for approval, we asked them that they undertake a do no significant harm principle assessment of the actions that they were proposing. So in a sense, we build up a logic, whereas the DNSH, the do no significant harm principle, does apply at the program level, and it has to be operationalized in the project selection stage, meaning that all projects, when they are selected, they have to make considerations, and in the design phase, they have to be mindful about the environmental objectives of the do no significant harm principle. By saying this, I also have to clarify that the taxonomy regulation does not apply to public financing. The colleague who asked the question, and others may be also familiar with the fact that the taxonomy was put up as a standardized qualification system for economic activities to help investors in financing green economic activities. This will not cover all the activities which the EU budget may support. And secondly, the EU budget has to support, in some instances, operations which are not profitable. There is a funding gap. This justifies the public intervention. Therefore, the public finance do not always fall strictly under the criteria of the DNSH, but still it has to be considered during the project design. I hope it replies to the question, although it's a bit of a contextual reply, but I hope it clarifies a bit.
I think it does. Thanks for elaborating on this. Next question is for Jean-Claude and refers to examples, specifically if you can give like a typical circular economy project that local and regional authorities within LIFE would go to.
Yes, thank you. Well, as I said, in the website, you will see 6,000 projects, but just to give one example, if I may. For instance, we have a project for, I have in mind project for Greece for electrical equipment, and where we developed, I would say, the recycling. So with creation of specific centers to recollect the equipment and then to, I would say, produce all of them. But maybe you will not keep this in mind. So I give you a second example. I'm sure you will keep in mind, all of you, which is the project we call Life Tackle. Tackle for you means football. So Life is working with everyone. So we even have a project with football association. We have developed it. It's called Life Tackle. And the idea is to work with all of them because, of course, when you go to football match, or football match means a lot of mobility, a lot of consumption of energy, a lot of water, and a lot of waste. And we have developed this project in order to, I would say, work on all these items together. And I think it's a good example just to show circularity. So it's not only one item that you cover, but you cover many items together. And of course, as I said, we have many of them, and I invite you to go to the website. You have a couple of brochure on it, and you will see more.
Thanks, Jean-Claude, for providing these examples, and also good to refer to the project database that has a lot of examples of projects, also for local regional authorities. Next question is for Nathalie. On business models, there's quite some interest in the CCRI community on asset evaluation. Could you give an example of such a project?
Yeah, so in terms of new business models, as I was discussing, we are not necessarily we know that one of the difficulty is indeed to assess the asset and these new business models that are much more difficult than assessing usual credit risk. The challenge is that it's rather than revenues from sale that are quite easy to model and that are much more predictable. You have to rely on long-term revenue streams backed by contracts with a very granular number of service takers. You also have this issue in relation to the residual value, asset return, balance sheet extension, and so on. So this is much more difficult to assess. On our side, we are working with some leasing companies. That's mainly the types of projects that we have financed. Notably, we have a project with the Lager London, which is fostering access to equipment finance at various stages of the asset life cycle, and that also facilitates remanufacturing and refurbishment of these assets. So we are working with this type of company. We are also working with Loxam in France, which is also a leasing company. To lease electric equipment and tool with circular effort to extend the life and recover the components and the material at end of life. So we are assessing these companies. I mean, then the way that we are assessing it, I mean, I cannot go through all the details except the basic principle that I have outlined at the beginning of my answer.
Thanks, Nathalie. Next question does not refer to one of the speakers directly, but I think this, so I give to Jean-Marco. It's a question about what is the best funding tool for a private company to establish a center to boost circular economy, for example, focusing on professional training, a research center where teaching and exploring circular economy solutions, both in a theoretical and a practical manner. Jean-Marco, is this a question that you can answer, or maybe one of the other speakers?
Yes, of course, if you this is a very good answer, good question. Of course, it would need a very long answer. But if the company is starting from zero, it is extremely important to rely on financial institutions like ours in order to be addressed to the main trends, benchmarking of the sector, and an analysis of the project in itself, how it can be done, and then how it can be financed. Anyway, this is an ongoing path that of awareness that the corporate needs to do in order to grow in terms of availability of the financing. What I can tell for sure that anyway, if I can elaborate something that is a bit in our worries on a daily basis, we are still missing very good circular economy projects. We are fighting in the economic and financial arena on this, and I would say there is a bit of shortage of this. That's why probably it is more likely to come back to school and to learn something more on the new modeling in order to move forward. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you. Yeah.
Can I also intervene to this question? Because I mean, the question as such indeed is a bit broad, but it provides a project example, let's say so. I would say that under cohesion policy, one of the strong dimensions is the training and the labor market as such. So you quote actually two examples, the professional training and research centers. I would say that both fall very much under scope of the cohesion policy support. Again, depending what your region or member state has put forward as a development need. But we do see this type of investment across the EU very often, and we have substantial funding going into that. Just to quote an example, we speak a lot in the EU, and all EU policies are geared towards the climate and circularity transition in the long term. And we know that it will have different socioeconomic impacts depending on the regions and where do they come from. So in this transition process, we emphasize and we focus a lot on reskilling of the labor force. We do focus a lot in terms of investment on research and innovation to find new, let's say, economic activities, so that those regions which would be lagging behind in this transition process, that they find an alternative activity to benefit from. So this is very much in the focus of cohesion policy funding, and I would say it really matches this development need, what you have put in the question.
That is, I think, good to hear for the person who posted this question, and also good to emphasize that it is not only circular economy, but it is also about jobs and skills and developing jobs. So not only the material, but also the economy part. So thanks, Mate. We have 3 more minutes and 2 questions. I think we can manage, although the next question is quite long. I will try to summarize it. The question is, how do you see possibility to get financing for funding towards improving circular economy in the built environment sector, especially regarding reuse of materials? The person who posed this question see that there is some barriers, a chicken and an egg dilemma, and that there's currently still going more funding to waste management. Well, it's missing in the built environment sector. Natalie, you're the first person that is referred to in the question, so.
So it's a complex question, and I think the answer is also should be working on different levels. One potential is to use actually public procurement. So for instance, public procurement represents 14% of EU GDP. And we can, for instance, in the public procurement of buildings, include some circular criteria to promote a circular approach in construction. This is already a step. In terms of financing that can be proposed, for instance, by the bank, we can, for instance, offer municipal framework loans that can cover many different and relatively small investments in the building environment in cities. And they can include some components like a material bank that can facilitate the circular uptake by other actors. So this can be on the public level. Then on the finding solutions, other solutions other than maybe banks, etc., but maybe having some circular material. We are actually involved in the assessment of project for the Innovation Fund on behalf of the Commission, and we have notably assessed a project by 4 Belgian companies to have a building block from circular building block instead of cement one. So this is also the type of project that are interesting, and where, yes, at an early stage like that, the grant financing can be also an interesting type of funding.
Thanks, Natalie, for taking up this question. We go to the last question, coming from Spain, of 2 entrepreneurs who are in the pre-seed phase. They have a project that is based on circular economy with a good environmental impact, CO2 reductions of 80% and 36% more profitable than competition. Also a very concrete question, what is the best way to find 2.5 million euros of funding? One of you wants to fund this or want to answer this question?
I can do it. Of course, that's the reality of the process. Come to us or to any bank. I'm talking, of course, about Intesa Sanpaolo. To introduce the project, we take a look at the project. We have metrics, we have circularity assessment, we have measurement, we have framework, we have potentially questions, we have advice in order to how to improve it, and we have pricing. In this case, what I wasn't mentioning, probably maybe this is not going to be the price of some very nice colleagues I see here, but we're going to provide our best pricing, discount and incentivized compared to the normal pricing, because we want to incentivize circular economy projects. So this is the best way, of course. Everything is correct and goes well. Of course, we're going to finance with our best conditions this kind of project.
If I can add to this, sorry, please.
No, just because it was also addressed to EIB, I just wanted to highlight that this type of amount, I mean, we are working, well, there are 2 points. First, pre-seed. So the most appropriate is to get either some grant financing or some equity at pre-seed stage. So very early stage, or at seed stage, so very early stage, but maybe even probably it's earlier than that. And in that case, we would provide it through intermediated through funds, and it's not really up to us to decide, but we are really delegating the assessment to the funds. So that's.
If I may just very quickly, because I think we don't have too much time, but just to refer to the fact that I didn't mention it, but it's on the slides. We have what we call the Green Assist facility. So because I don't know exactly the development level of this project, but you can look at the slide and go to Green Assist, and then you will see the possibility to get advice in order to facilitate presentation of your project. And this advice, depending on the type of advice you need, but this advice is even offered for free by CINEA by the executive agency when it's done. And just the last word, because we come to the end, I invite you as well to look at the links I put at the end of the presentation, because I put a link to a document which helps to find your way to the different EU programs. So I think it's rather interesting for you as well, not to enter in detail, but you will find all these different programs, and if it can help in any case. Thanks.
Thanks, Jean-Claude. Matej, you also wanted to reflect on this question, no? Okay.
I think Natalie and Jean-Claude mentioned what I wanted to say.
That's good, because we really have to wrap up. In the meantime, a reference is made to the Green Assist in the chat, the instrument that Jean-Claude was mentioning. I really want to thank all of our speakers of today. I think they've done a fantastic job in introducing the instruments that they have, but also keeping in time, which is, I think, great that they managed to do that. I also want to thank all the participants in the chat for sharing questions, for your attention, and a big thanks for the other colleagues from the CCRI, CSO, and organizers of this webinar. I want to close with expressing my hope that this webinar actually fulfilled all your expectations, but also a request for the participants share expectations or interest for maybe a follow-up webinar on funding. If there are questions that are still open, share them with us, because that will also help us to make sure that the next webinar is in line with what you hope to hear from us. I think that's it. Thanks again. Have a good afternoon, and we will see each other.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.